my fellow wizards, the much anticipated fall 2024 test realm is here, and I have to say it's one of the biggest updates we've had in a while. We're getting everything from a Krokotopia graphics overhaul, a new side world and questline, a crazy new type of combat mechanic called spell weaving and fusion, a whole bunch of new spells, an entire Bazaar revamp, and much more. So without further ado, let's talk about it. To start, let's discuss the amazing new look for Krokotopia, which many players have been waiting for ever since Wizard City got a beautiful graphics update all the way back in 2018. And I have to say, I'm loving everything about this update. Everything just looks so much more crisp and really brings this area into the modern era of gaming. I think previously it was probably pretty jarring for new players to finish Wizard City and enter Krokotopia, only to be greeted by some rather dated graphics. So hopefully this new update will also make people want to keep playing and exploring this gorgeous new world. While the devs have confirmed that there will be no classic mode for Krokotopia in this update, I'm really hoping that they do eventually allow us to toggle between old and new graphics just like in Wizard City, so that people can enjoy both, whatever their preference, and preserve that old nostalgic look too. Let's hope this trend continues and we won't have to wait as long for them to update Marleybone and other Arc 1 worlds. Next, let's discuss some new and very much needed tutorials that have been added to introduce various mechanics to players and how they tie into the new Celestia Prequest. For those that don't remember, back in the day, there used to be a Celestia Prequest that required the player to enter a very difficult dungeon in Marleybone and complete 10 levels, ending with the cheating boss Estrakir Gloomthorn in order to actually access Celestia. This questline was later retired, but there's always been kind of an awkward transition between Dragonspire and Celestia ever since, until now. Now, upon beating Dragonspire's main questline, you'll be directed to Diego in Unicorn Way to learn how archmastery and school pips work, which is a mechanic that I definitely think confuses newer players. I think this tutorial works quite well, especially because it does force players to actually learn the mechanics before proceeding, rather than just having you read a wall of text, cause, let's be honest, I doubt any new players were reading this archmastery tome. Since players naturally start getting Archmastery as a stat at level 50, I think this is a great place to introduce this concept. And for those players who want access to school pips earlier than level 50, I do have a video on how to do it if you're interested. The Archmastery tutorial then leads directly into the Celestia Prequest, which is given by Halston in Ravenwood, and has you going to Marleybone to get a better introduction to the Spiral Geographic Society and Morganth's Umbral Legion before going to Celestia for the first time, which just really smooths over the transition to the second arc. You're also introduced here to the new side world, Selenopolis, by getting a quest to speak to Rafat in the Oasis, who guides you to Selenopolis and then gives another tutorial on the Magic Wheel, otherwise known as rhoshambo, which explains school strengths, relationships to other schools, and mechanics like gambits, which is a great start to introducing people to PvP and advanced content style spells. I will say that this was desperately needed far earlier, like when the final Novus boss was originally released, which had most regular PvE players quite frustrated and confused, so I'm very glad that they chose to make a tutorial here. This should hopefully make future main storyline fights less jarring for the average player, and does make me wonder if KI will be adjusting existing bosses or future bosses to further encourage use of Archmastery and the Magic Wheel. Here, Rafat also introduces the new concept of spell weaving and fusion for the first time, and the player will then have the ability to pick their weaving school or secondary school and gain their first rank in spell weaving. Yes, for those players who have always wanted to dual school or invest in a secondary school, it's much more viable now. KI has been pushing dual schooling for a while, especially with dual school gear and school pips, but I think there previously just hasn't been much incentive to get people on board, so I think their hope is that spell weaving may change that. So, how does it work? You'll pick a secondary or weaving school, which has to be different from your own native school. So for instance, a Storm Wizard cannot weave into Storm, but they can weave into any of the other schools, and you will then complete quests related to that weaving school to rank up and gain new rewards and spells. There are currently 3 different ranks, each with different rewards, with plans to add more over time, and you can earn a new rank after every world you complete, starting with Dragonspire at rank 1, Celestia for rank 2, etc. There are 3 reward types depending on your rank: spells, equipables, which might include jewels, gear, pets, mounts, etc., and fusion formula, which allow you to make combination spells that have you combining 2 existing spells together to create a brand new spell, which is pretty cool. You can see that each weaving school currently has 2 different spells for each school combination, a regular spell at rank 2 and a fusion spell at rank 3, and that each does school damage for your weaving school, not your native school. So a fire weaving into ice will get an ice damage spell with utility, which encourages dual schooling. Unfortunately, you do not currently get any spells that use your native school damage. Fire weaving spells tend to add damage over time to other spells' utility. Both myth and ice weaving give a lot of trapping options. Balance is kind of a mixture of everything, but does give some especially neat dual blade options. Death Weaving offers some negative auras and weakness debuff utility. Storm also gives many dual blade options and charm utility, while Life offers some interesting dual aura options, though obviously there's more complexity to all these schools than what I'm listing here. You can swap your weaving school at any time for free and still keep your progress and ranks with previous schools, but all the rewards for other schools are deactivated. Any spells you might have learned are untrained, and training points are refunded automatically, and you can no longer equip other weaving school jewels. When you weave into a school, your title updates to reflect that, with different unique titles depending on your native and secondary school, and on the character page there's a new tab for magic weaving which shows your progress for different schools, and progress is badge based, kind of like crafting. Once you've chosen your weaving school, you'll need to complete several quests in order to rank up and access different rewards and spells. Some quests are story-based, and some require you to complete certain badges, which involve completing various tasks like fighting enemies, fishing, or helping others quest. For each rank, only 3 of the current 5 badge options are needed to progress, so you do have some choice here with what activities you want to participate in, which is good. Once you rank up, you'll eventually gain access to several fusion formulas unique to your spell weaving school combos, and you can start fusing spells together. To spell fuse, you need at least 1 copy of each spell required for the spell fusion in your deck. There will also be a new tab to show what fusion formulas you have trained and add the different components to your spell deck. There is a bit of bugginess in general right now with spell fusing in Test Realm, so I cannot show you exactly how spell fusing will work in Live Realm, but here are some graphics and examples from the devs that should help highlight how this will work. So in combat, if one of your spells required to do spell fusion has no glow, it means your deck does not have the other spell necessary for fusion. If a spell has a yellow glow, it means your deck has both necessary spells in it, but the other spell is not in your hand yet. If spells have a green glow, that means both the spells needed for fusion are in your hand and ready to fuse. I personally think it's a great idea to have these color indicators because I would 100% forget all the potential fusions without them. So once you have both spells you need in your hand, you'll select one spell, then the other spell, kind of like enchanting, which will fuse the spells together to make your new spell, but note you can also select one of the spells and just attack as normal by selecting an enemy. You can also select spells to fuse in either order, and they will result in the same spell fusion either way. Once spells are fused, both original component spells are discarded from your hand into the discard pile. The new fused spell then acts as any normal spell and can be enchanted or even used in another fusion, which we may see in future updates. If you cast or discard a fused spell, it will also be added to your discard pile, which can later be reshuffled. Other rules are that treasure cards cannot be used in fusion, however, any tier of any spell element path can be used in fusion, whether it's path A or B, and any pet or equipment item card that share the same name as a component spell can also be used in fusion. And once you learn your first fusion formula, Diego should offer a tutorial on spell fusion for you as well. I want to stress that I think spell weaving as a concept is a fantastic and creative mechanic that has so much interesting potential and really could transform the game for the better, and I want to applaud the devs for coming up with this. However, after experiencing spell weaving myself, I do have some concerns too, which I hope will eventually be addressed, because they do put a bit of a damper on what should be a revolutionary system. However, I'm going to save those concerns for the end of the video for the sake of covering all the updates first, so bear with me. Next, let's talk about Selenopolis itself and all the new content this side area has to offer besides just spell weaving. First, I'd just like to say that I love the design of this whole area. It just feels so grand and mysterious when you first enter, and I was dying to explore immediately. I think having the 7 school statues of the Krokotopian gods as the centerpiece here was an amazing choice. In the starting area, you'll find a small area with NPCs and stalls right next to the entrance of the marketplace where you can get some cool new goodies. First, there's some new cosmetic gear that can be acquired by beating all the challenge badges for the area, which is a nice incentive for players who like harder combat. I love the wand here, which is a massive sword in different colors for each school, but I'm personally not crazy about the outfit. I think it's like the animal hands and feet which feel a bit out of place, but let me know what you all think. There's also new craftable socket wrenches where you can use higher level socket wrenches to craft lower level ones, although it would be nice to see some options to use lower level to craft higher level wrenches as well. There's a jewel vendor with various types of jewels and pins to peruse, as well as new craftable level 170 gear that comes in 2 forms, Avatar and Khonsu. Avatar is essentially identical to the level 170 Wallaroo Reaver gear, so maybe this is meant to be an alternative way to get Reaver gear without having to farm the Nightmare Dungeon or other Wallaroo bosses. It uses the new Moondust reagent, which likely comes from the bosses in the level 170 questline in Selenopolis. Meanwhile, the Khonsu gear is a more defensive set that uses the Avatar gear as a crafting component instead. I actually really like the looks of both gear sets here, especially the majestic looking hair from the avatar hat and the cool looking Khonsu staffs. Now let's talk about the new level 170 questline. After you beat the Wallaroo main questline, you'll be able to get a quest from the Librarian in the Arcanum, which, without giving too many spoilers away, has you reuniting with some familiar faces and rescuing many of your old allies who have been kidnapped and taken to Selenopolis. It's so much fun to see some fan favorites, and this whole questline definitely feels like some heavy fan service, but I'm honestly here for it. Early on, the questline also splits into 3 streets, which you can do in any order, which is obviously a callback to Firecat Alley, Triton Avenue, and Cyclops Lane in Wizard City, which I really enjoyed. I haven't had the chance yet to fully finish the new questline, but from what I have seen so far, I think a lot of players will have a really great time with it. I can confirm there are also several new secret bosses to be discovered as well if you venture off the beaten path, so I'm thrilled the devs have chosen to add those to reward exploration too. Along with the questline, you'll also be getting a new Selenopolis themed spell for your school by completing a spell quest that you receive shortly after starting the main questline. The spell quest was actually fairly long and in-depth too, which I really appreciated. I was able to get the spell Hecate on my Storm, which is basically a strong single hit, and like most spells, it has 2 spellment paths you can upgrade down. Although you will also have new monofusion options as well to choose from, which I'll touch on in the next section. Balance gets Chameleon Clash with a random damage type and a pretty goofy animation. Fire gets Ahmet, who I kinda just want a pet, not gonna lie, he just looks like a good doggo. Ice gets Shu, which I have to say does feel pretty dang epic. Life gets a healing spell with Tawaret, and I have to admit that all I could think of was this when I saw her.
I think Moto likes you.
I like 'em big. I like 'em chunky.
Myth gets a double hit with Toth, and honestly, this is how I feel when I get super hangry. And finally, Death gets Anubis, which is definitely my favorite of the bunch for the animation alone, but let me know which of the group looks the best in your opinion. Anyway, let's talk about another new mechanic now, Monofusion. So Spell Fusion, which we touched on earlier, works by combining 2 different school spells together to make a new spell, but this other mechanic, Monofusion, combines 2 spells of the same school together to form a new spell. Currently, we're getting Monofusion options for all the new level 170 Selenopolis spells, which you can train from your respective Ravenwood school tree, which give different utility options depending on the fusion. So for instance, if I combine my Hecate spell with a Stormblade, I can now get a spell that gives me both at once, which is kind of cool. Or if you have Fire's Ahmet spell, you can monofuse for a damage over time or extra trap effects. While the number of monofusions are currently a bit limited, it does seem like the devs intend on expanding them over time, so we could see some really cool combinations with future updates. There are also a bunch of other new spells, including some auras and utility spells. If you visit the Arcanum, you can now train spells like Cosmic Charge, which adds a 20% Pierce aura, and Stabilize, which is basically an improved brace that reduces incoming damage. However, there's also new negative aura spells, which we have never seen before. These negative auras can actually be placed on enemies and have a negative effect on them instead. They can also be stacked with regular positive auras, so you can have both active on you at the same time. Negative auras include Pathogen, which reduces incoming healing, Starfall, which reduces outgoing damage, and Attenuate, which increases incoming damage. I think this adds another interesting mechanic to combat, which is awesome, so it'll be interesting to see how people go about countering any negative auras the enemy places on them. The devs have also added a bunch of new utility spells to the Ravenwood and Arcanum professors and trees, which means these spells can be trained by other schools as well, which is awesome. Death gets 3-fold Fever with a triple -65% to healing spells. Ice gets Impair, which removes 3 charms. Myth gets Purge, which removes 3 weaknesses, and Balance gets 4 new spells with Blade Dilution, which clears 4 charms in exchange for 15% charms on the enemy, and Trap Dilution, which instead clears 4 traps in exchange for 20% traps on the caster, along with the straight damage spell Spinning Scythe, and Courageous Charge, which does balance damage, then echoes a 20% Pierce aura. Up next, we have a massive Bazaar revamp with a whole new front page and filters to streamline everything. The front page allows you to immediately jump into any section directly, and there is now no delay when updating inventory. Yay! There's also 2 new pages, one for jewels and one for activity treasure cards, namely Monstrology, Gardening, Castle Magic, and Cantrips, which is nice. The reagent page has filters now, which will allow you to find what you want more quickly, and the equipment page now defaults to usable and level descending. The buying and selling pages now look the same, and you can use category arrows to move either left or right. The equipment page now has filter buttons that let you sort by usable, no stat / cosmetic gear, affordable, which means whether or not you have enough gold to buy it, and owned, which filters out equipment you already have in your backpack. You can also search for items by name, which is awesome. On the sell page, you can now select add no auction and sell no auction items like you can at a regular shop, however they will still not appear for sale in the Bazaar. There's also a new option, equip after purchase, where the Bazaar will offer to buy the item you previously had equipped if it is auctionable. To go along with the Bazaar revamp is also the Backpack Buddy, which is also now offered through the Bazaar. It's a service that helps you find and sell items in your backpack that you don't want through the use of an advanced filter system. You can set up rules for item you want to sell and page left and right to look through the different options. Using filters, you can also click the Find Items button to pull up any items in your backpack that meet the filter criteria you've set. Once you've selected your filters, you can then click the Sell Items button to sell them. Filter options are saved locally to your computer, so you can save the rule settings for future selling, but note that all options are off by default, so no items will be accidentally sold unless you choose to enable them. There are also several safeguards in place to prevent accidental selling. For instance, locked items are safe and will not be sold, and the Backpack Buddy is initially set up to always keep skeleton keys, quintessence cores, guildgate keys, gauntlets and dungeons, socket wrenches, and crown seeds. Auctionable items will be sold to the Bazaar, while non-auctionable items are sold to a shop, and if selling your item makes your character exceed their maximum gold amount, any additional gold will be lost in the transaction, so be aware. There are so many different filter options, so I really encourage people to go through them all themselves, but some ones I'd like to highlight include selling temporary mounts automatically, which to me is awesome because I honestly always forget to delete my temp mounts and they take up extra space for no good reason. I also like that you can purposely filter to sell duplicate items, and you can now also sell jewels and pins too, which can then be bought by other wizards from the Bazaar. Once you're done selecting your filters and choosing your items, you'll see a sell confirmation page so you can check and make sure nothing was included that you didn't want to sell and unselect it before selling. Overall, I have to say this is a great quality of life update with lots of safety nets in place so you don't accidentally sell anything important. I also love that the settings are saved locally, so once you set up the rules, you can hopefully just leave them be and quickly sell stuff going forward, only tweaking as necessary. I think this really just streamlines so many features in the Bazaar that were otherwise annoying or cumbersome, and the devs have also stated they're working on dealing with people botting as well, so hopefully we'll see that issue fixed soon too. Teleporting has also been given an upgrade, with it now being much less expensive mana-wise. Previously, marking a spot to teleport to later cost a fixed percentage of your wizard's mana, but now marking a location will only cost 1 mana if you have less than 50, 5 if you have less than 100, and otherwise cost 10 mana, which should definitely save people from having to run around to get more mana constantly if they're teleporting a lot. And recalling or teleporting back to your mark now costs the same amount of mana as marking to use. So if you use 10 to mark a spot, it will be 10 to teleport back. One big change is that your marked spot is no longer removed when you teleport to it, so now you won't have to remember to constantly remark your favorite spot at the Bazaar again and again. You can just keep teleporting there until you mark a brand new spot. Nothing super fancy here, but it's great to see all these quality of life changes that just cut back on some otherwise annoying parts of these existing features and streamline the whole experience. Now onto one of my favorite quality of life updates in Test Realm, pack previews. Whereas previously you could click the preview button on packs and see a short list of potential items in a given pack, now you can actually see all the drops that a pack has and what rarity they are based on the items your wizard can pull by level and school. Instead of wondering if a specific item is in a pack or not, you can now actually check properly and really see what these packs have in them, which removes so much unnecessary stress and questioning. I'd love if we could one day get official drop rate percentages for pack items too, but this is a fantastic quality of life update that has been desperately needed for a while. People should never be questioning what they're getting from a pack when they're spending real money to open them. In addition, there is also now an inspect icon on second chance chests that allow you to view all possible items in a second chance chest as well, which is also extremely helpful. I just love these changes all around. For Beastmoon lovers, there are also 5 new Beastmoon Forms to try out. The Storm Fairy, which buffs herself and teammates while punishing pacified players. The Myth Elf with spells that complement fire teammates, dealing damage over time and boosting damage with traps. The Life Ninja Pig, which synergizes with fire damage, over time spells, and can punish myth traps. the Fire Krokomummy, which manipulates damage over time effects and synergizes with life teammates, and the Balance Colossus, which pairs damage over time and traps, and is the first Beastmoon form to add deferred damage over time spells, which is pretty cool. There is also a new Beastmoon reward schedule to check out from December through April of next year. Otherwise, we have a few cool miscellaneous updates that I think people will be interested in. Now, certain ultra-rare gear sets in Dragonspire, Chrysalis, Lemuria, and Novus are auctionable for the first time. So basically, the Tier 2 gear for many of these worlds that are used to craft the Tier 1 gear are now auctionable, so you can buy them from the Bazaar to more easily craft the best gear at that level bracket, which is awesome and cuts down a ton of farming time. So definitely keep an eye out for these gear pieces if you want them for crafting, and a lot of times they're also pretty good stat-wise on their own, allowing people to have solid options at a lot of level brackets that they can just buy from the Bazaar rather than spend hours farming, although obviously the best gear will still need to be farmed or crafted. Angelica Windspar in Castle Tours also now has 4 new housing teleporter recipes and new extra large regal castle blocks for the housing decorators out there, and honestly I love the new teleporter looks, especially the cool shimmery Novus ones, so people will have some great new options to check out here. Alright, with all those updates out of the way, let's return back to the concept of spell weaving and a few concerns I have. I was initially super excited to try out the different spell weaving quest lines, which definitely give some cool lore tidbits. As a storm wizard, I wove into death and ended up being sent to Dragonspire to learn more about the history of the awakening of the Dragon Titan and the fall of Dragonspire, which was really cool. However, I quickly ran into trouble when I met up with an NPC who I had to assist in a fight. Admittedly, I was spamming through some of the text rather quickly, but what wasn't immediately obvious was that I needed to have the NPC deal the final blow to the enemies rather than killing them myself. Once I figured that out, I changed to full support mode, and I'm totally fine with supporting, although I have to say making a storm blade someone else feels a bit sadistic. But the whole fight quickly went downhill because the AI in this game is simply not very smart. Having to let the NPC deal the final blow to complete the quest is incredibly aggravating, as the AI kept blading and empowering me instead of just attacking. I mean, I guess he knew who the real powerhouse was, so I can't really blame him. Anyway, I was left sitting there for like 15 minutes just passing repeatedly and praying the AI would eventually get around to hitting. In my case, we were also fighting life mobs and they kept healing, so the whole process just dragged on like crazy. In my opinion, this requirement should be removed or the AI somehow made smarter, because it just takes agency away from the player and left me getting increasingly frustrated. It didn't help that at the time the death spell weaving questline was bugged, so I eventually had to swap to fire weaving to see if that would go any better, and I ran into the same weird requirement where the NPC had to deal the final blow, although at least here, for some reason, the AI was a lot more competent, so I was able to complete the quest. So, rank 1 accomplished, right? Not exactly. Upon returning to my weaving tree, I was given a new task to earn multiple badges. I could pick 3 of 4 badges to complete, including defeating 60 mobs, killing a boss 15 times, catching 3 specific fish, and joining an adventure party or guild group, and completing 12 mainline quests. And here's where a lot of players are getting frustrated. Defeating 60 mobs and killing a boss 15 times aren't necessarily difficult tasks, but they are tedious ones. While badge requirements were reduced for Test Realm for the sake of time, these requirements are unfortunately just mind-numbing busy work. I sat there and genuinely did kill 60 mobs because due to some bugginess, I didn't get credit for the badges immediately, so I can say firsthand what this will be like in live realm, and it's not fun. It's about as engaging as watching paint dry as you kill the same mobs over and over and over. Same thing with the boss fights. It just feels disrespectful to your time as a player, and frankly feels out of place with the concept of spell weaving too. Fishing doesn't seem that bad at first glance, but I have heard that the fishing requirement, which was only 3 strawberry jellyfish in my case for rank 1 in Test Realm, may be increased in Live Realm, which is not so great. There's also an issue where higher ranks require rarer fish to catch, and even at rank 2, the requirement was to catch multiple epic rarity fish, and I ended up having to refresh one pool over 15 times just to catch one single fish, let alone more, which also ate up a ridiculous amount of energy. Also, not everyone enjoys fishing or has the necessary fishing spells. I could definitely see this being a real struggle or even a game breaker for some people, especially with those rarer fish eating up so much energy to even find. Finally, the last badge requires you to join an adventure party or guild group and help other players do 12 mainline quests for a lower level world. I feel like this is just kind of awkward and kind of encourages high levels to falsely adopt a low level player to use them as a means to rank up their spell weaving. I think it could create toxicity where high level players then rush those low level players through mainline quests and possibly ruin their experience because the higher levels won't always be wanting to help from the goodness of their heart, but just to get through it as quickly as possible to finish their spell weaving quest, after which they may just dump the low level player. Based on recent developer commentary, it seems like they were hoping having this specific challenge would encourage high-level players to introduce the idea of guilds or adventure parties to lower-level players, but they did admit they need to do some onboarding themselves too, and thankfully they did hear the pushback on people not liking this requirement and did then add a 5th badge option, which involved defeating bosses from the spell-weaving quests again, so at least players will have more choices here, which I do appreciate. But the bottom line is that even as a max level who can breeze through these requirements, my reaction upon seeing the badges for each rank was to be like, that seems like a bad use of my time and also just not fun. And the thing is, you have to repeat similar badge requirements for every rank and then again for every weaving school, as you can see in this example for balance, and people are doing the math. Just for the defeat 60 enemies badge, you'd need to defeat 360 enemies to do rank 1 in all weaving schools. To unlock all 3 ranks for each weaving school, you'd defeat 1,080 enemies, and if you wanted to do all that on 7 wizards, it's 7,560 enemies, and that's just one of the badge requirements. And let me remind everyone that being able to swap your weaving school on the fly was supposed to be an advantage of the system. Not so much when we have to do all this grinding to rank up every school. So in my opinion, they either need to vastly cut down these requirements or remove them entirely. I think it will turn a lot of players off from trying spell weaving in the first place, which is a shame. Also, currently, when you get the quest, it just lists the badge names instead of the actual objectives for the badges in your quest window, which is not helpful since there's no tracking of how many enemies you've killed or fish you've caught, and you can literally forget what stuff you were even supposed to do because you can't actually read the book again to double check, though thankfully this should be an easy fix. And after all those badges and grinding is done for rank 1, for instance, what's your reward? A cool new spell? No. I got a single dual school pierce jewel and access to craft more from my tree. As I discovered, you don't actually get any new spells until rank 2 and 3 are completed, which require you to finish Celestia and Zafaria and do even more quests and badge grinding. In fact, I carried on with my fire weaving quest for rank 2 and was again quite frustrated because for the next quest you have to actually play as the NPC and are forced to use their spellbook to fight multiple enemies, with most spells using gambits and the magic wheel. In theory, this could be a good way to introduce a hands-on demonstration of gambits and PvP-style combat, but in practice I think being thrown in the deep end like this is likely to really confuse and frustrate the average PvE player with little to no knowledge of these new systems. I think it would help a lot to kind of simplify these fights just a little bit more, or have the enemies hint at what spells or gambits might be best to use against them to better teach players how gambits actually work. The rank 3 fight against a cheating boss worked much better in this regard because first, you're able to use your own deck and stats, and second, because the boss literally gives you item cards with gambits that would be extra effective against him. I almost feel like the rank 2 and 3 questline fights should be swapped because rank 2 definitely feels much harder by comparison because you're forced to use the NPC's deck and stats, and you aren't given much guidance on what spells might be best strategy-wise. And the thing is, once you complete all these quests and finish grinding out all your badges, you end up getting spells that just really aren't that optimal for PvE players. Don't get me wrong, these spells are great options for PvP or advanced content, but I just don't see the average PvE player using them with any regularity. And yes, the devs have repeatedly stated that this is an optional side mechanic to encourage dual schooling and creativity in general for PvE players, but for all the time and effort involved to rank up, it doesn't feel great to just get more subpar spells that can only really be used in incredibly niche situations, to the point I fear that most PvE players won't end up engaging with this new system very much. And you don't have to just take my word for it. Here are a number of players giving feedback in the official Wiz Discord saying the exact same thing. Again and again, people are asking for spells that are more catered to PvE because they just aren't finding value in the current versions, and the devs openly admit that the current spells are designed for PvP and advanced content, not regular PvE, so it's pretty clear-cut who spell weaving was actually intended for, and it's not the average PvE player. I currently wouldn't really recommend spell weaving to any PvE players if it goes live with the current requirements and rewards. As a max player, I don't think I'll really be using it, honestly. It's just not worth my time, and I say that with some real sadness because the actual system itself is so freaking cool. Who doesn't want to fuse spells together and make cool new combos? I just really hope that in future updates, the devs consider both adjusting some of the requirements for spell weaving ranks and giving us more spell options that would also benefit the average PvE player more. While it's great to give people more options for dual school here, I worry that there just isn't enough incentive to get people to move away from the Blade AoE option when it is most efficient. I do see more casual players or solo players potentially enjoying the use of the current fusion spells from the perspective of like, hey, I don't care about having the optimal strategy here and I just like looking at the new animations, but the reality is the current effects are very much built to benefit PvP or advanced content players. I think especially in group settings, there will always be pressure to pick ideal strategies, which is usually Blade, Feint, AoE, especially in farming scenarios where most people just want to get through as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, the devs' idea of being creative with spell fusion and encouraging dual schooling is often at odds with farming for the best gear and can create toxicity amongst the player base. And hey, this is not necessarily the developer's fault, it's just how MMOs tend to work, but again, this will lead many PvE players to avoid spell fusion altogether when it doesn't help them achieve that optimal playstyle. So I suggest giving players spell fusion AoEs and more strong single hits so we get the best of both worlds. More variety of spells for everyone who wants them while still having efficient combat speed. Just think how cool it would be to get like an Ice Earthquake or Storm Scarecrow Drain spell, I'm just saying. I did ask this question during a recent developer livestream for feedback on Test Realm, and Ratbeard did respond via text that they would certainly consider adding traditional PvE-focused AoEs, so I can only hope that future updates may give PvE players better spell options than we currently have with spell weaving, and thus encourage more players to interact with this new system. I do want to acknowledge that the devs are definitely between a rock and a hard place when it comes to luring players away from Blade and AoE strats unless they literally want to remake how the game works from the foundation up, which I think would be impossibly difficult and upset most of the player base, so instead any updates are going to be about compromise. More choices and options for players of all styles is a good thing, but spell fusion still leans a bit more toward benefiting PvP/advanced content players while leaving average PvE players feeling neglected and frustrated. I will say that with such a cool new system, there is so much potential here for future updates and adding spells that players from all different playstyles can enjoy and benefit from. And to be clear, I think there are some really cool spells in here that can benefit PvE players. I just think they're currently only going to be useful in fairly niche situations. At the end of the day, this update is still incredibly impressive and makes me excited to see what's coming next. Definitely let me know in the comments below what you're most excited for in this update and what your thoughts are on spell weaving. I'd love to hear from players of all backgrounds and suggestions on what kind of new spells or fusions you'd like to see in the future. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing as it really helps me to make more amazing Wiz content for you all. And if you want to support me and the channel further, you can hit the join button below to become one of my awesome channel members. As always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing!